The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time and joining us today. Trust everyone is keeping well. My name is Lidia Wojdak. I am a briefing consultant at the Lenovo Executive Briefing Center in EMEA region, and today I'll have a pleasure to moderate this webinar. To start, let me just provide a couple of useful information. At the moment, all the attendee lines are on mute. However, as we go ahead, and if you have some questions, please feel free to type them into the question field that you see in the GoToWebinar panel on your right side. Alternatively, you can follow up with us with your questions by email after this event. I would like to also mention that this session is going to be recorded. Now, let me introduce today's agenda and, more importantly, our speaker. Tikiri Wanduragala will share with us today his thoughts about Edge, about HCI and hybrid clouds as technologies, and will show us how those technologies enable the digital transformation. Without any further ado, let me hand over to Tikiri. Tikiri, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Lydia. Good morning, everybody. And as Lydia said, thank you very much for taking time this morning to spend time with Lenovo and myself. What I want to do in the next 45 minutes is to give you an overview of this very exciting technology, right? Which is hyperconverged infrastructure, hybrid cloud, hybrid IT, lots of little things that are happening in the industry. Actually, they're not very little things; they're quite big things. And I want to give you a high-level view of it. There are a lot of sessions running in the Arrow event, where you've got details on all the different solutions, etc. I want to give a picture where you try to fit all this together and put a level of context about it. Okay. Now we can talk about all this clever stuff, but we are living through strange times. Okay, and actually, hyperconverged infrastructure, hybrid cloud, etc. is going to play a part in this. So, the fact that we're holding this event as a webinar as opposed to face-to-face, right, is an example of the changes that are going through worldwide. At the moment, there's a lot of tactical moves made by companies. And, when like I'm based in the UK, and when I heard what was going to happen in the UK with the lockdowns, etc., my initial feeling was that everything was going to close down, all IT, etc., all the data center access, everything. But actually what we saw is something different. Some things, some projects were put on hold, okay? And you'd understand that. But at the same time, other projects were accelerated, right? And interestingly, is to look at what was accelerated, why they were accelerated, etc. So some of the key dependencies of whether projects were accelerated or even attempted was there had to be minimum risk, right? There had to be minimum disruption. They had to be done quickly. Okay? Any project that allowed for resilience, right, agility, etc., that was accelerated because you had companies and organizations having to change their model, right, from a face-to-face model to a web model, etc. And that put a dependency on the IT infrastructure. Okay, so this is the tactical changes we've seen and we're living through right now, and it'll vary from country to country as to how long or how short it'll be. What's also interesting is that this is adding a new dimension and people's strategic visions. And it's interesting, a lot of people have the time now to think about these strategic visions are changing. Okay? Now, one of the ways of looking at this and to try to understand this, I sort of view this as a fundamental change in the environment. Right? It's a fundamental change in the environment going right now and going forward. Okay? And businesses will have to transform to match it. And the best way of looking at it, and a good analogy I'd like to use, is comes from Charles Darwin. Yeah, and I'm just focusing on the scientific side of his work, right? And if you look at Darwin's first, and very, very well known, it was not his first book, but the most important book of his, The Origin of the Species, he points out that it's about how a species fits to the environment. And you have this phrase, survival of the fittest, okay? That was actually a phrase that was coined in later editions of the book. What he actually said was something far more complicated, right? It wasn't as simple as survival of the fittest. But what he was trying to get across, and this was the fundamental truth in his work, okay, was that it's the species that fit well to the environment thrive. And you could say the same about businesses, right? Businesses that fit well to an environment thrive, okay? It's not about the strongest or anything like that. It's the most adaptable, okay? The ones who can change. And a specific example, like, if you looked at this planet, right? Again, an analogy, at the time of the dinosaurs, they were the apex. I mean, they just ruled the roost here, right? And because they fitted the environment of Pangaea or wherever it was, I don't know exactly at the time, but then suddenly a major cataclysmic event happened. That event changed the environment. And those species, like the dinosaurs, could not evolve quickly, could not move quickly enough, okay? But other species could. And that's an important point, okay? The important point is that a new species didn't have to be created. Those species were already there. Mammals were already there. And in this new environment, they thrived, okay? So, and this is the idea here. This applies to business, it applies to IT. So what I'm trying to get across here is there are technologies, right, that 12, 24 months ago, the business case wouldn't fly to use them, okay? But now, when the environment has changed, some of those technologies may become really top-notch or really rise, etc. Okay, so it is about being able to adapt to the environment, right? And that's what's interesting about hybrid cloud and hyperconverged infrastructure. Yeah. They are technologies that allow you to be agile and be able to be flexible, allow you to adapt. So my role is kind of interesting in Lenovo. I visit a lot of large account customers, partners, etc. And usually I get a view from in the Europe, Middle East, Africa region. That's the region I cover. I get a kind of insights, pick up snippets from various different organizations, companies, different sectors, etc. And I normally put hear the same words over and over again, right? And it's usually because they've all been to the same analyst or something like that. But jokes aside, there are certain things that are always in people's minds, okay? And I've drawn this bubble chart. I'm not a chart expert, as Joris will vouch for from last night, right? But what happens is this. Depending on what's happening, the current situation, these bubbles get bigger. That's what I'm trying to say, right? So CIOs currently are very, very, involved with security. Security is a huge issue, right? It has a huge impact. There are so many different threats coming in, so many different ways to handle it. So security is like an absolute, always there bubble, okay? Then recently, we've seen a lot of interest in data, right? We've heard this phrase, data is the new oil. Not a good phrase now, given the price of oil, but you get the idea, right? A better one would be data is the new gold, okay? And then you need to look at, and this is where it gets interesting, what actually makes data valuable, okay? And what makes data valuable is the application. And the application is valuable because it is an encapsulation, a set of rules which hold the business logic of a company or a process, etc. Okay? That's the secret sauce. That's a secret sauce that gives this data value, right? Then the next thing that I hear from these organizations, businesses I visit, so they see the application data security story. They realize legislation is changing quite dramatically, right? Which, as the governments, etc., are better understanding the values of data and the power of technologies, they're realizing we need to legislate. So can companies have to align with that? The other three things I hear about quite often, and the thing I think is the most important for companies, is the people. Okay, and often when I meet CIOs, when I meet architects, when I meet analysts, etc., you hear this term about silos. People, they've got expert skills in specific areas. It could be storage, networking, yeah, databases, whatever. But what is actually required, right, is a horizontal view. Somebody who understands the value of those components fitting together in a line to a business. Okay, so this thing, and often I hear, how do we break the silos? How do we break the silos in organizations? Now, that's interesting because one of the things you have to remember is the people are going to be introducing these fancy new technologies, be they hybrid cloud, be they hyper-converged infrastructure, be they edge. Okay, so even if the technology is going to break your silo, you need people, and so it's this interfaces that's really, really important. The last interface, and this really links with hyper-converged infrastructure and hybrid cloud, is agility. Okay, and we've really seen this in the last few months. Okay, I've been to retail companies who, had a 40%, the 60% was going to be face-to-face selling via their shops. 40% was going to be web-based, or even less sometimes. Okay, suddenly it's all shifted web-based. Okay, that had implications on the infrastructure. Bam, bam, bam. Okay, they had to do all of that very quickly. So this idea of agility is really, really important if you're looking at being able to change and adapt to environments. And again, when you look, and this is another thing I see in companies, executives talking at the high level, right? And people on the ground who are actually making this infrastructure work, listening to these fancy words like agility, application, and saying, how are we going to do that? And there's a big mismatch sometimes, there's a big conflict here, right? And this is one of the most important things at the moment in IT. IT people being able to explain things, right? Not only to senior management, but to people outside of IT. Okay? That is going to be an absolute paradigm shift that's going to be required. It's about doctors understanding the value of virtualization. Okay, I say this because my son, who's a medical student, is actually learning Python. So you can't go to him when he's a qualified person and say, "Oh, you can't do this because the software doesn't." He knows. He'll have a rough idea. So the world is moving, right? And it's very important to understand this deeply and understand what a word means and what the underlying factors are. Now, as I said, this thing evolves, right? 18 months ago, GDPR was the trajectory. Okay, the trajectory was, oh no, we've got this new law coming. We need to make sure that the data is protected. Have we got the right data? Are we allowed to have that data, etc.? So suddenly, all these bubbles changed, and only 4 letters were needed: GDPR. Okay, and all the bubbles that were related to those 4 things grew. Now we're looking, given our current situation and our trajectory going forward, agility is really important. Okay, it is going to be something that really captures everybody's imagination, and it's going to be of huge interest. And what that means, so agility, how will that play out? It will mean the ability to move a business from pointing in one direction to pointing in another, and move the infrastructure at the same time. Okay, it's a big ask. It's a big ask. So what are the steps you'll need to make that happen? So number one is technologies like virtualization are going to be absolutely key. And when you look at virtualization, why is it important? Because it takes the link between the hardware and software, it releases it, right? So the software, now the application, is able to be moved. When you talk about HCI, it gets even more interesting because really that's about the spread of virtualization to networking and storage, etc., right? So now you're seeing a far cleaner break, right? So suddenly you start saying, hey, HCI is something really useful here, right? Because, okay, I may have to pay a premium here, but it gives me that agility, gives me that ability to change direction, okay? So moving forward, it's going to be technologies that allow people to be flexible, to be adaptable, that are going to be very, very important, okay? So with that in mind, I want to take a look at the trend and how did we get where we are today and what it's going to look like in the near future, okay? So the first thing here, my little pen isn't working. Let's see if I can figure out why. I can't, so anyway, let's let's go without it. But what you have here, and this was the concept of a data center maybe 10, 15 years ago, was the data center was in a fixed space, right? A fixed location. And it was secure because you didn't allow people access into it, etc. And then suddenly, about 10, 15 years ago, this idea of cloud comes along. Okay? And the concept there was going to be these massive farms of compute, okay, in deserts in the middle of Arizona or wherever, okay, and they were going to offer compute at very, very low cost because they were using lots of pizza boxes. I mean, and these were the size of multiple football pitches. That workload was going to go up there. So were the apps. Data centers were dead. What you need is everything is going to be on the cloud. Okay, that was the story. Then you see an evolution a little bit. Suddenly we move 10 years. Things start evolving, right? People start doing this and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not as easy as we thought. Okay. Suddenly you've got a situation where you still have those global, but legislation is coming, right? People are realizing, oh, wait a minute, the rules in the EU or the rules in Russia or the rules in China or the United States are forcing me to hold the data in certain spaces, holding the application in certain spaces. So you're getting regional requirements. And there are multiple requirements, right? Because there are different options. You may have an AWS option, an IBM option, a Microsoft option. So it's not a single cloud story, it's more of a multi-cloud type story. And then it even comes down to a country level. Countries may have different taxation, etc. And then certain applications say, when you're using mobile devices, you want stuff and you need access very, very quickly. Latency could have issues, right? So you need to go local. I was working with a media company, right? And they were building data centers to service London for streaming videos and things like that. And their requirement was that data centers had to be inside the M25 ring. Okay? So that's the main orbital road around London. They had to have them in there. The initial thinking was, oh, we'll go to the cheapest location. Now, trying to put the cost of land in the M25 ring is pretty severe, okay? So, but that's a latency issue. Then the data center itself has morphed. It's not that the data centers died, okay? It's, well, I need to have like a data center in three forms. That's why I've drawn it that way. The data center, the conventional data center, that is running applications that you don't want to move up to the cloud because for one of the main reasons is you can't, right? It's maybe written in programming languages that are completely outdated now, very tightly coupled to the hardware, okay? Very difficult to pull out. And the other nice thing about this sort of stuff is maybe making lots of money. So why? Why change it? And maybe the cost of doing these moves can be really expensive. I know many CIOs whose careers have taken a big dive trying to move things that were very tricky. Okay? I've drawn two little cloud boxes in the data center. And those two cloud boxes I've drawn two for the following reason. One is a box which allows cloud type function and the ability to move data and apps up and down, right, to wherever you want inside and outside the company, right? And that is a requirement. The other one is cloud function or software function, modern software function, which does not allow you to take the data out of the company, but gives you the look and feel of a cloud environment, right, inside your organization. Now, this is really, really important, okay? Because a lot of the time, people spend a lot of effort on software, right, which is customer facing, but internally, you don't spend the time on user interfaces, etc. And that's one of the big things we've learned on the web, right? Fantastic user interfaces. Because how do I know that? Well, you don't need a PhD to use PayPal. You can do some very sophisticated technology with very little training on the interface. Okay? So if you don't do that inside companies, if you don't have this flexible, agile infrastructure in companies, the problem is going to be what we call shadow IT, right? Because if I'm a software developer and I want some service or I want some virtual things, and I go to my IT department and say, "Can you provide these to me?" And they turn around to me and say, "Fill this form." Okay. Well, guess what? I mean, I might be a crazy form filler who wants to fill in forms, but if I'm not, I just go on the web, bang, bang, bang. I'm on, I don't know, Azure. I'll pick my stuff up and go. Okay, and this is happening from company all over the industry, right? And so what you have to look at is morphing your data center, changing your data center to something that maintains existing business, enables you to exploit some of these fantastic technologies available on the cloud, and then also offering that technology, that capability internally to your own internal users, right? Because it's a transformative technology. Now, is that everything, right? Because that's because we talk about hybrid cloud. I would love this to be everything, right? Because this is a big story in itself. This story has all the players. You've got Microsoft, you've got Google, you've got Amazon, you've got IBM, SAP. You've got people doing things. People from the cloud coming down, and you've got people from the data center going up. It's big stuff. The multi-billion, maybe trillion-dollar business. Changes are happening in here. I'd love to tell you that's the whole picture, but actually, it gets even more exciting. And where it gets really more exciting is this, with this technology called Edge. Okay. Now with Edge, you have. So this is basically saying, hey, I can get compute power in really small packages nowadays, right? In the past, I had to use gateways or cut down PCs, or sorry, beefed up PCs or cut down servers. Now, well, you can put a whole bunch of compute power in a very small package. Then you can also have some very clever security features, etc. So now I can run software in a different way. Previously, my software that was outside the data center, I would be very frightened of holding stuff out there because I wasn't sure of the security. But now with some of the encryption technologies and some of the things I actually show you with one of the machines we've developed, right, may allow you to do some clever stuff. This addresses this issue of latency, right, of being able to respond to people, end users, your customers, right, very quickly. So Edge is another phenomenal technology that's coming in, and it's also a technology that is going to need hyper-converged, virtualized, hardware-independent technologies, right? So I've drawn this chart. There's 2 arrows. The green arrow is really the movement of data and applications. So we've come from a world on the left, my left-hand side, this could be all sorts of, when you do all this video stuff, it could be all over the place, but it's on my left-hand side, okay? A world where it was really a one-way street. Give me all your data and applications, and thank you very much, right? We are now in a world which is far more nuanced, right? It is a nuanced world where a customer can place the data and the app where he or she thinks it's the best place for their business, okay? And this is fantastic, right? This is really fantastic because it changes who's in the driving seat, etc. I call this map it's after a band called the Eagles, okay? Some of you who've seen me presenting this would have mentioned, and I would have heard that before. I call it the Eagles chart because on the left-hand side, which is data center to global cloud, that I call Hotel California. That's one of the songs on one of the famous albums, yeah. And that song had the famous tagline, "You can check out any time, but you could never leave." Okay, and that's what a lot of people, have experienced of in cloud sort of environments. Okay, and on the right-hand side is another song from the same album, right? And that's called what's the famous song? It's "Life in the Fast Lane." Right? And there's a famous line in that song, which I really like, which is everything all the time. Right? And that's what's possible with edge computing and being able to respond when customers want it. Okay? So it is phenomenally interesting time. If you're a business partner, if you're a customer, right? If you're a supplier, it is really interesting because this is a change in the environment, right? This is a huge shift. And there is so much opportunity. So with that, Lenovo, what are we doing? And who do we partner with? What's our strategy, etc. Okay, partnering, that's a really important thing. When you look at this model of data located on cloud, on regional stuff, or all different spaces, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly, right? It's not going to be done by one player. And people are going to pretend they can, it's all, you come here, welcome to my hotel sort of thing, yeah? But the reality is it's going to be partnerships. It's going to be absolutely built on partnerships. It's not going to be built on technology, it's going to be built on partnerships, okay? And luckily at Lenovo, that is one of our real strengths. I would say one of our strengths is manufacturing and R&D. We know how to build things, okay? And things will have to be built, right? And because we focus on that, from edge device, from PC, etc., back to data center, we have to partner. We have no choice. Okay? We don't try to own software stacks, etc., right? We're very conservative on the software stacks we have, and that enables us to partner with Intel, with Nutanix, with Microsoft, etc. Okay? Then we also focus on what we believe in our industry is our Formula One. Okay, like in the car industry, car companies use Formula One to test their metal. Okay, how fast can they go? And that technology eventually comes into the commercial cars or normal standard cars, and for that's high performance computing. We also deliver systems to hyperscalers, the big cloud providers, on that chart, the ones that are at the top, the global providers, okay? That is a mechanism for testing our ability, right, at the logistics, the supply chain. These people they're maniacal on their design requirements. They want it this small, this light, this, power consumption, etc. And they want huge quantities in this region and in that region, etc. Okay? So we build stuff not only for the big global players, but for those regional players, okay, all the way down that cloud picture. And also we take our existing knowledge in enterprise and also bring information from high performance computing, bring information from hyperscale. Because guess what? A lot of the technologies like you see with hyperconverged infrastructure, right, comes from those spaces, right? They actually come from those spaces. So there's technology moving in different directions. It's not, one area holds that technology exclusively. And one key thing is this world, the picture I drew is complicated. It's not easy. I'd love to tell you that this new world is easy, right? But it isn't. It's a lot of different pieces. So services, etc., are either by ourselves, our partners, etc., are going to be very, very important. Okay? Because in the initial cycle of learning about this thing, customers are going to need these services. So as a means of basically being able to enable themselves quickly. Okay, so that is really our focus. We're very, I would say, if I picked any one of these things, the most important thing is partnerships. Okay, for us, that is the way we get to our customer base. So with that in mind, and we could see the complexity coming down the line. Okay. By the way, there is a way to handle this complexity, and I will come on to that. Okay. And one of the key things we did in the design of our systems, and this is one of the paradigms we use, is a realization that we have to simplify. And believe you me, it's easy to say it, right? It's everybody, it's one of these things, when they ask you to tidy your house up, you're to simplify, it's hard to do, it's hard to do, right? So we keep driving towards it. So we introduced in 2015 two architectures, two brands, okay? The first one was Think System, which are the building blocks, okay? And we looked at simplifying those as well by making sure we're trying our level best to reduce the number of parts, the number of software stacks, etc., right? But still, it is standard servers, standard networking, standard storage, and you can build what you like with it, yeah? So for customers who want to build their own infrastructure, that piece of the data center I showed you, where, it was the older stuff that you didn't want to change too much, right? Or you could change the storage a little bit, you may be able to get more frequency, you may be able to get bit networking, okay? So if you want to build it your own, and there's a value to it, you use Think System. We then went and were approached by software companies, right? And worked with companies like Nutanix, right? And this was actually 5 years ago, with Nutanix, with VMware, various companies. And the approach there was, can we specify a configuration, wrap the software around it, in addition, wrap a set of services around it, okay? So that a customer can get an appliance, right? Because this is for the customer who wants to get to the application layer quickly, right? And sees, the finer construction of an infrastructure is not really what they want to do at this moment in time. They want to move really quickly. And to that, we gave the name Think Agile, okay? And I like to simplify things even further. Think System is build it, right? And Think Agile, people want to use it, okay? They want to focus on their app, right? And let the manufacturer or the business partner worry about making sure everything is up and running. So can you see what's happening here? This Think Agile thing. It's bringing some of those web concepts, right? Some of the things that people you have, like when you go onto the AWS or Azure, right? Where in the background stuff is happening, you're just using it. So what you're seeing is those sort of concepts and the ideas coming into the data center in these forms of Think System and Think Agile. This is what the Think System portfolio looks like, okay? Built with Intel microprocessors. Built with Intel, right? And we have towers, blades, mission critical. And really, when you look at hyperconverged infrastructure, the rack and tower is the really interesting thing, right? I call them the racks, okay? And then the other interesting one is the edge, okay? One of the key things with hyperconverged infrastructure is to try to put intelligence into the machine, right? And that's a big thing about infrastructure. Moving forward, it is going to be very important in these complex environments that the infrastructure tells you what's happening. And the way we do that at Lenovo is a product called xClarity that sits inside the hardware, okay? And then feeds the information up to the software layers, either at the hypervisor layer, it could be the management layer of the Nutanix system, the Prism, right? or it could be further up, even up to the application layer. And that's what xClarity does. So it's like one of these hidden secret sources that's lying there, but it actually gives a lot of power to the hypervisor and the app. Edge, this is a very important thing because just like when you have hyper-converged infrastructure in your data center, there is no reason why that hyper-converged infrastructure doesn't actually spread right to the edge. This is a machine we announced last year. It's called the SE350. Very interesting machine, okay? And I photographed it next to the PC I'm using, the ThinkPad I'm using to present to you. This is a X1 Yoga, and you can see this thing is not much bigger. The important point of this, and the reason I want to show this machine, it's showing a new paradigm shift, right? It is saying I'm going to have a data center capability, because this has the Xeon, Intel Xeon D chipset, that enables me to run the same software stacks that I'm familiar with inside the data center. It has the same management stack, okay, as I have inside the data center. Then the other interesting thing is it introduces technology, and it has technology in the side in the area of security. Okay, so there's tamper evidence. The drives are encrypted. If there's if someone tries to shake it or get into it, you can either destroy the keys or move the keys off to the cloud. Okay, so it's secure. Now that means I can change my programming model, right? I can say I don't have to keep sending data back to the data center, right? I can actually do some work on this thing or a cluster of these things. And companies like Scale Computing have done some very, very interesting work with edge devices, robo devices, etc. Okay, so this introduces a completely new paradigm, right? Everything doesn't have to be hubbed in the data center. Everything doesn't have to go to a cloud. It could be actually formed somewhere else, right? This is very interesting moving forward. So think agile. As I said, this is our platform we use for our hyper-converged infrastructure and our cloud platforms, right? We work with Nutanix, VMware, Microsoft, right? And we have our own in-house for people who don't want to be aligned or want a more open source view with the product called Think Agile CP. And now it's very, you can look at these things. As I said, I think the industry is not going to be, it's not going to be one person who dominates. It's going to be different players with different strengths. Okay, and it's interesting for me if I look historically. I've been in the industry a while, and you see the thinking of companies, where they start and where they evolve into, right? Microsoft, in my time, was an operating system and an application company that then pivoted into the cloud very, very successfully with the Azure, okay? And still the application like Office 365 is very powerful in that space, okay? So we work with them on that, right? And we build two scenarios. One is software-defined storage unit, yeah, or a hyper-converged unit, as well as a cloud-based Azure Stack unit. Okay, so two different options there. With VMware, their history comes from the virtualization. I never forget when I worked on ESXi, 16-way server in the year 2001. Okay, so they are absolute. They showed the industry, showed the world about virtualization, and they've grown that. Okay, into different products. And the most successful hyper-converged one is vSAN. Okay? And then they've also grown with linkages to the cloud, etc. The third one on this chart on the very left, and this is really interesting, it's a Nutanix product, right? And if you're looking at hyper-converged infrastructure, these were the folks who sort of virtually gave it that name, okay? And with Nutanix, it was their timing. When they came to the market, it was a realization, hey, folks, why don't we look at server, storage, and networking as one entity, right? As opposed to three separate things, three silos. You get the idea, right? Put it all in one block and then cluster this, right? And this is a very, very powerful story. Given the current situation, right? think of this scenario. I've got a business, right? And I'm in lockdown, okay? I suddenly need to scale, because I'm getting so many hits on my web. I need to scale things, okay? And I need to scale things really fast. Am I going to want to go in and tweak around the SAN and mess around and with caches and all this nonsense, okay? Or am I going to think, you know what, adding a node, just one node, and suddenly and I add that node, it improves the reliability, the performance, etc. So technologies like Nutanix and this idea of hyperconverged infrastructure, the whole concept of this breaking down the silos, right? Having a clustered approach, having the ability to scale your capacity, performance, and your reliability easily is really, really neat, okay? Now, as I said, I've got timing constrictions. I'm going to just stick on to a couple of these solutions, right? But please understand that different ones do different things, right? And have different strengths and weaknesses, right? We have approached this in Lenovo in the following fashion, right? We see in some situations, customers want the configuration, but they have their own means of buying the software, etc., right? So what we are doing there is offering certified nodes. Okay? Then the other scenario is customers want the whole thing packaged in addition to services, right? And in those scenarios, whereby we will come in, make sure the drivers are at the correct level, or our partners will come in and make sure the drivers are at the correct level, etc. Okay, so we offer that as well. So that's the subtle differences, right? We offer for different markets and different positions. Okay? I said with the Nutanix, I want to just focus on one of the, as I said, you have different sessions in this webinar events. I want to have a quick look at the Nutanix solution, because I think, as I said, it is the key one in the HCI space. So they sort of were the inventors of this idea, in effect. Okay, it has grown now. So not only have you got the capability inside data center, right, with products like Calm, Flow, and Beam, right, they're basically, and their alliances with the global cloud providers, right, you having the cloud experience or the hybrid cloud experience from Nutanix, okay? And in addition, with the Leap functions and using their hosting capability, you've got the DR pieces coming into the picture. And recently, the IoT side of things, the edge side of things, are also mapping with the XI product, okay? So as you can see, this software map is mapping that original picture I was showing, and it maps it really neatly. Now, given those vendors' view, the other thing we offer is a solution called On Demand. Again, this is for different levels of integration. And here we have 3 companies, but here I want to focus on one which is very interesting and fits this idea of hyperconverged infrastructure, and that is scale computing. And what is really interesting about scale is the design idea, right? And the idea of taking this hyperconverged infrastructure, right, of converging networking, storage, and compute, and then taking it to another level by focusing on remote office, branch office to start with. And the reason that was really, really interesting is you had to simplify, okay? Because when you think data center, you have the ability, you have a lot of clever people in there, screwdrivers can be flying, left, right, and center, okay? But when you're in a shop, right? When you're in a bank branch, right? That's a different story altogether. So the what you deploy needed to be very, very easy to use. So it's very important that when I look at software and technologies, etc., what the heritage is and core strengths, and that's what scale brought to the story. And that simplicity now, they're actually growing backwards from, okay, back into the data center, etc., right? And we've done a lot of work with them. There is web books published so not webbooks, Lenovo press documents published. I can see my old heritage, been in the industry a long time, okay? And so the Lenovo press documents, and it's really worth reading because there's a lot of, I know in the Benelux region, one of your big retailers use this technology, but it's across, across the world, right? Very important. So what this tells you is that this HCI hyperconverged infrastructure ideas aren't limited to a data center, but can spread all over. So lots of choices, lots of opportunities. There's a phrase in English: enough rope to hang yourself. Right? How do you go through this stuff? I've always worked as a manufacturer, but when I advise customers, etc., and I talk with them, and many I've known for many years, right? It is really important to engage and to really find the best fit here, okay? And to find the best fit, at Lenovo, we put together programs and workshops, etc. And I tell customers, I really strongly advise customers to go through these processes, okay? Because this is how you turn that really complex picture and make it simple, okay? We have to get away from this, oh, I'm going to give it a go, right? Sadly, in this IT industry, we do have a tendency to point and click, okay? So what is really neat is we work with all these players, right? We work with Nutanix, we work with Scale, we work with all these different players, right? We can work with you as a customer through our partners, okay? And go through and work out what is most probably the best fit. It could be various reasons, okay? It could be because you need an application that's on Azure, right? And that's your choice in that space. It could be you want to have a more open source approach to things, right? It could be you like to be independent, right, of the big players. And so there are different subtle points, and that is really worked out when we work together, right? It's not easy to do just, as I said, in a point and click fashion. The other really important thing is to do proofs of concepts, okay? One of the very large integrator, European integrator, started using one of these HCI solutions. And one of the big things they did with us was they actually ran that installation inside our data center in Germany, the one that Lydia works at. And basically they were able to get it working perfectly before they made their sort of choice. Okay, so hopefully I've given you a picture of what we do at Lenovo, how committed we are to partnerships, how committed we are to these new technologies that are coming down the road. And I'll leave you with one thought, right? When you're thinking about using these new technologies like hyperconverged, hybrid cloud, hybrid IT, edge, etc., and it's by Einstein, right? We have to use new thinking if we want to solve problems, okay? Because the old thinking got us into these messes, and we have to start a new type of thinking to break things down, okay? Hopefully that was useful for you. Enjoy all the other webinar sessions. If you have any questions, ping us on this chat. I haven't actually sat and listened to a webinar, so I don't know how you do it, but I think there's a chat thing you can do. Or you can send, you've got my name, you can just send me an email or video email or your local folk an email. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great few more sessions at Arrow later today, and have a lovely weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Tikiri. Thank you, everyone. I'll just add to what Tikiri was saying. While we will be closing that webinar so you can attend other sessions available during the day today, please be so kind and leave with us your feedback. So once the webinar closes, you will see a quick survey popping up with a couple of questions that as a reality aim to help us improve this experience, and any future webinars you will be meeting us at. So thank you very much again for being with us. Tikiri, thank you for presenting. I think you left lots of good pointers and food for thought, as we say, for all the attendees. So hopefully this will proceed as who knows, maybe we will meet in Stuttgart or in the UK for some one-to-one engagements and further conversations. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your feedback. Have a wonderful Friday.
Bye-bye.